I am a big fan of lazy leadership. So if I
I just got to celebrate that, Eric. That's awesome. How might AI impact your leadership journey? Welcome to another episode of Relearning Leadership, where we explore a specific leadership challenge and break it down to help improve your leadership, your organization, and just possibly your personal life. Today, I get to talk to somebody who I consider not only brilliant with amazing expertise, but somebody I truly call friend. Eric Kihn has his PhD in physics and heads up AI strategy for the US government in environmental sciences focused on problems like how climate change is impacting cities. With that in mind, Eric still approached me last year and said, Pete, if you have a class in AI and leadership, sign me up. Well, challenge accepted, sort of. Instead, I said, how about we form an AI leadership lab and bring you on to help us develop what it is leaders need to understand about AI? Well, he accepted that challenge. And with that in mind, I invite Eric Kihn to this show to talk a little bit about his AI journey and the questions he's exploring as in AI in his leadership role. So, welcome to the show, Eric.
Thanks, Pete. Happy to be here.
So, I want to set some context first and maybe take a step back in time before generative AI was even a thing, or at least wasn't real to most of us, back into machine learning. And I'm curious how, from a scientific perspective, that became a thing for you, or what problem, I guess, was trying to be solved at that point, and maybe give us even a time frame of when that was.
Sure. For me, my first experiences with machine learning and AI came probably in the late 90s. So in the late 90s, we were starting to get really large databases and starting to face what we called at the time a tidal wave of data. As digital collection happened more and more, we realized, wow, this is amazing. We're really understanding the pulse of the earth. We have so many great ways to measure and collect and all this, but we're not getting any more scientists. And so the model that had been at the time was each scientist, or PI, principal investigator as we call them, had its own data stream that effectively you just worked on day and night and sucked all the knowledge you could out of it. Well, two things happened. One, more and more observations came along, and the internet came along that allowed us to share those. So instead of me having only my data, now I had access, and all the best science was being done across multiple resources. Pretty quickly, you realize, I'm going to need some tools and techniques if I'm not getting 1,000 more scientists to help me with this. What is it that's going to allow me to even keep up with the volumes that we have? So in the early 2000s, we ended up working on a project called the Environmental Scenario Generator, which was a project for the Department of Defense where they wanted to mine historical records of weather to find environmental scenarios. So they wanted to know what was the wettest and windiest winter we might see in this area, or what kind of challenges. And at the volumes that there were and the way they wanted to ask these questions dynamically, you needed those tools. So we started to develop a toolkit based around AI/ML.
So essentially, you're talking about a volume of data problem that scientists have. How do we actually mine data, meaningful data, out of all the noise of data that's out there? Is that a fair kind of summary?
Yeah, and really the challenge from the scientific perspective is it turns out humans are really good at correlating in 1 and 2 and 3 dimensions. So you can see this variable wiggles with that variable on a plot, or you can see 3-dimensional plot. Oh, here's clusters of data that mean something. Well, what happens when you're now collecting in 50 dimensions of environmental data, higher resolutions than ever, more frequency? You really need a partner to point you at the interesting bits. That was the key of AI/ML, was it could get you, hey, something's different here. This is changing. We're seeing a trend here that you might want to get eyes on, because it was hard for the human mind to wrap around the volume, the diversity, just really all across the spectrum of data.
So yes, it's giving you not only more eyes, but actually almost like infrared vision in the data that's seeing stuff you may not even be able to see.
Yeah, it really goes beyond just more eyes. It was a different way and perspective and seeing in multiple dimensions across looking for correlations, one of the things that AI/ML did for us in the science community was lower the cost of curiosity, we called it.
I love that quote. That's an awesome one.
Yeah, because you know, we when you go in and dig in through data and you're doing it by yourself and you're on your machine doing it yourself, it's one thing. But if you're like, I think there might be something over here, and you can release an agent to do that for you, and hopefully it comes back and says, yeah, that looks like it's worth your time or not. It really does lower the cost of curiosity, so you can do those explorations kind of independently,
Yeah.
which is fantastic.
You mentioned to me the other day also, there was a change happening in the scientific community at the same time, not just the volume of data, but actually the way science was being run. Do you mind sharing that connection?
Yeah, one of the reasons I got interested in how AI is going to impact leadership and the roles of leaders is seeing the wildfire that swept through the scientific community over the last, I'd say, particularly 10 years. So before that, AI/ML was its own niche area, and there were a few of us doing it, and it was difficult back in the day because there were no TensorFlow libraries, open source tools that you could just connect to and try. You had to bake everything from numerical recipes in C, build your own stuff. Well, when that changed and everybody was able to explore, what it really changed was the thoughts of the scientific process. So, whereas we might make investments in developing physical understanding, doing base level research, what if we want to do a better numerical weather prediction? And instead of doing that, we just get it more data. So maybe our investment should be less in the basic research and more in better, higher quality data, more frequency, more resolution. And that's proved to be true. So when people are thinking about the scientific applications, it's really changed where you might make that investment, how you do the process. If you looked at a plot over the last 10 years of the number of abstracts that mention AI/ML, it would have been very obscure. But now the key scientific meetings, if it's not half or more, I would say we're at peak gold rush around AI/ML because everyone is just being so productive and fruitful applying it to their data collections.
What's really cool about what you just said, and I don't think I've heard it said this way before, or I haven't heard it this way. In fact, the data or the volume of data, the approach of data is changing the way scientists are doing experiments. And that's maybe what led to your curiosity. Will the same thing happen with data and business and the way I lead an organization, team, programs, et cetera? Am I interpreting kind of that jump?
Yeah, for me, so one of the my background is as a scientist, right? I came up grinding through data and building plots and programs and doing the scientific process. And then I was suddenly selected as a leader. So I lead a division at NOAA. I have big science teams. And my approach to that was, well, I better learn what leadership is through what are the methods of leadership.
That's a really good thought, Eric. Like, I better figure this out.
You would be surprised how seldom that actually happens.
No, I'm not surprised, but I appreciate the insights there. But so yeah, I interrupted you, so I actually want you to continue.
Well, so what was interesting was the analogy. So from my perspective, as a scientist, you have scientific workflows from designing the observation you want to collect to transforming that observation, doing analysis, a production of results, either publications or maybe new scientific products. And AI/ML came in and just totally disrupted those workflows. How we did the business of science was changed, what we valued, what was there. And I was like, this is interesting. So now I'm in a leadership position, and suddenly 2 years ago or so, we started to see the AI/ML or large language models approach that. And my first experiences with it were breaking through into leadership was, well, one of the big challenges we do is develop metadata for data. So that is descriptions of it by reading scientific publications and deriving the metadata. Suddenly, these large language models look pretty good at that. It's like, that's really interesting that we have this metadata component that it can do. Then we started to see it in its ability to summarize articles. So my division puts out about 70 publications a year, and I try to keep up with my team's articles as best I can, but I could start to ask it, give me a one-page summary of this with a little background so I can understand, this new ocean model quickly, which made me more productive as a leader, more able to engage with my team members. And then probably the penultimate experience for me was I was late getting an abstract together for a scientific conference, and I wanted to go, and I had done the research, but it was in the form of PowerPoints and documents and all sorts of stuff. I just fed it to ChatGPT and said, write me a 2,000-word abstract, and that abstract was accepted for an invited talk. And I realized, this is changing where I'm going to be putting my time and energy. And that's when I came to you and asked, hey, do you have a class that I can take to figure out how this might interact with leadership?
Yeah. And I want to dive into your kind of experimentation with AI for your leadership, but I want to take maybe just one step back and give people a construct of the type of AI programs you're working with today. Because when I hear what you tell me, I kind of get overwhelmed or just it blows my mind as to the scope and magnitude of kind of the, not thinking of AI in leadership, but AI in terms of solving some pretty interesting challenges, or at least critical challenges of the world having. Do you mind sharing just at least maybe that broad brush of the kind of technology AI programs you're leading or your teams are fostering within kind of this environmental area of the U.S. government?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, it was in 2020 when NOAA formed the NOAA Center for Artificial Intelligence. And back in 2022, we did our first survey across the agency and asked, how many of you are using AI/ML for different projects? And it definitely blew my mind. We had something like 250 different projects that were ongoing developing AI/ML. And I would say easily that's over 500 now. Under the strategy, when we formed the center, then we're trying to corral that, and you can put it in some big buckets. The obvious ones are AI for numerical weather prediction. So what has traditionally been done by your local weather forecast and alerts for life and property that come out of the Weather Service. Well, if you look at what Google's done with things like GraphCast, based off AI/ML and just training it off the data that's in the ERA5 model, wow, that's looking really good in some areas, and I think it's rapidly progressing. So it's allowing decades of progress and improvements for numerical weather prediction. Another area that's exciting is identification and imagery. So NOAA has a fisheries division that does stock assessments and looks at fish and coral and things on the seafloor. And it's gotten really cheap to collect underseas video. That used to be a big activity, was a few videos. Now any GoPro, suddenly you're mapping coral beds and you're counting fish. Well, AI/ML can help you understand, what are you seeing, what type of coral, what are the fish, that sort of thing. And then a number of generative AI functions. One of the big ones the Weather Service just released is translations into other languages of alerts, warnings, and forecasts. So important for the social equity component. But when we did that survey and found the hundreds of projects, we probably had 20 buckets from engineering, data analysis, and monitoring across the board, that so many applications.
It's fascinating to me, right? The potential, right, of throwing some of this ability to analyze data, interpolate, and understand that data a little bit better, and the scope. And our goal in this podcast isn't to go into those, which are quite interesting projects and programs. My goal there is to kind of share. You're a leader here, working in vast AI systems for the past half decade at least, but then take machine learning and past 2 decades. Yet you still have a question about AI and leadership, and I'm wondering if you could almost like interpolate or extrapolate, maybe is the word I'm looking for there, the challenge others might be facing who haven't even talked or approached this subject. Do you interact with a lot of people who maybe are outside your bubble of AI and how they see it. Is there a gap forming, I guess, in this sense of AI in its broader implications?
Uh, well, my opinion is definitely there's a gap. I don't think people. I think people are interested and thinking, "Wow, this is cool. ChatGPT can, rewrite my corporate memo, and that's fantastic." But I think it's going to be transformative for what you're doing in leadership, and that's based on my experience of watching it from. It's very, again, back in the early 2000s, seeing it come along and kind of simmered for a while, and then suddenly there's this explosion where it's taking over things, changing workflows, just revolutionizing it. And that's happening faster, I think, with what it can do in terms of your leadership toolbox. And I just don't think there's an appreciation that that is going to change. And what does that mean? I mean, it means you as a leader better be ready, better start to think about how all the things you're doing now will be touched by it. How can I use it? How can I make the aspects of my leadership better using it? I again, I was hopeful when I came to you that there was just a class that somebody had done all this, but your answer was, well, we should do experiments. We should try to chase down, you know, what are people doing? How can you do it? How can we start to think about it ahead? Because I want to do it, for myself, but also for my leadership teams. I have people work under me who I want to make sure they know this needs to be in your toolkit and be prepared for it to change rather quickly.
Yeah. And that's what, I've appreciated about your willingness to kind of work with us on this discovery journey. We formed the lab because we didn't have answers, and we still don't have answers. And you're right, the landscape is moving so fast. Any answers we find are quickly in the past, and then we've got a new landscape sitting in front of us. Maybe reflect a little bit. I'd say we've been on a kind of this AI leadership lab, at least journey, like forming the lab, starting cohorts and stuff. It's been maybe 4 months now, 3 or 4 months. What surprised you the most, or maybe what are some of the things that maybe stick out to you in this early part of our journey together in terms of exploring this landscape of AI for leadership?
Well, the thing that surprised me the most, and this one was pretty easy, was I expected to come in and say, okay, what are the elements of leadership? Like, so you're a leader. What is it you would say that you do here exactly? And understanding, okay, a leader does strategic planning, a leader does onboarding of personnel, a leader does this. And I thought, okay, that there'll at least be agreement that these are the things that you have to do and these are the elements of it. And then, easy enough, you match up where AI/ML might take that over, might enhance it, might become an assistant to you on it. And my experience was, gosh, there's a lot of discussion of being a leader, but the actual workflows of leadership, the things that you do, are not well defined. They're different in different places. There wasn't okay, so this is what a leader does, because that's what then I would have, like, I thought, oh, this won't be too bad. We'll just match that up.
Check. I'm a leader.
AI is going to help there. It's not going to help there. Perfect. We'll just walk through this list of the 10, 20 things a leader does, and we'll be out of here in no time. Instead, it's kind of been a discovery of, well, there's some agreement around some elements of what it is to be a leader. There's different roles for a leader at different levels, and AI/ML can touch a lot of it, and you want it to. So there's things that make sense to turn it over to a trusted partner of an AI/ML partner, and there's places where you're going to want to hold that close for forever. But just that was the biggest surprise for me. Was I thought, well, there must be some document that just lays this out, but there really wasn't.
Yeah. Well, and I think what you get at there, and we often as humans do this, right? The Dunning-Kruger effect. The less you know about something, the more you think you're confident about that material. And I think people do this with leadership too. It's an incredibly complex landscape between management and leadership, and then all the use cases of managing and leading, and what that looks like. And I appreciate your willingness to explore some of these use cases with us. With that said, maybe let me ask you a couple of kind of like unprepared questions. So I didn't send you these in advance, and
Sure.
apologize, but maybe not because it's fun to surprise. Would you put yourself more as the AI optimist or the pessimist in terms of where this is leading us?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've been reading a lot about the groups in Silicon Valley that get together with the doom AI people and the optimists. One group says, this will totally free us from all work and we'll have a utopian society very shortly. And the other says, we'll be replaced Terminator style and this is it, the beginning of the end. I'm very much on the optimistic end of this. When you look from my perspective, when I look at AI, I see an assistant, I see a tool, I see a smart but needy compadre for my leadership. And I am a big fan of lazy leadership. So if I
I just got to celebrate that, Eric. That's awesome.
if I can find a way to take some of these things and put it off in a place that's I can trust. I mean, there's a lot to be said for trust and making sure it's ethical and all those things. But if you can, great. Whenever I test as on those personality scales, I'm always a big blue sky thinker. I like the big idea. I want big and bold, and details, drag me down. Well, what if you had tools that will help you do that? Or what if you're the reverse and you love the details, but you want to have someone help you guide you towards the big, I just think it'll make us all better leaders. Now, that said, I would be a pessimist if you don't want to bring this into your toolkit, because I think in 5 years, if you're not bringing this into your leadership toolkit, you're going to be run over by those who have it. And
Yeah.
I think this is going to be a really dynamic time, akin to when the internet came around, right? I mean, suddenly what we were doing before that, if you're old like me and can remember back then, suddenly what we were doing was completely different in 7-8 years, and that's a pretty quick time scale to change entire workforces and workflows and that sort of thing. So if you're aware, if you're energized and moving forward, I think it'll be great. If you, man, I just want to stay doing it the way I am, I just think you're going to get run over.
Yeah, probably no stopping the technology is going to happen. And are we ready for it? Are we prepared? Are we, that's up to us in that. I love your, I think that's all of us, right? I think our brains we try to conserve energy. We try to use habits. Lazy leadership. I love that definition. One of the premises we have in our lab is exploring. We believe we could actually build better leaders, through AI. And you've described some here, like, okay, we could augment some of the things we do. Like, we're not good at this, so let's augment that. Is there something you maybe personally have found to be the most helpful, in your leadership so far? And I know it's new for you too, but anything specific that you've latched onto that's been helpful to make at least feel like you're doing this leadership role more effectively?
Well, the obvious example for me has been the writing tools. So, often I have ideas put together and then I have to communicate it. And so I want to be a good communicator. And, grinding out a long newsletter or something like that can be challenging. But, you can use AI/ML tools to say, here are my basic ideas, write this, and importantly, set the tone. Like, I want this to come across as serious. This is lighthearted. Let's make this a little fun. How cool is that? And then you can look at it written in 4 different tones and say, oh, this one is it. And with a little bit of editing and again, you have to make sure you fact check it and do all that stuff so you don't get any hallucinations in there. But as long as you're doing your due diligence, suddenly you've got this effectively like an almost built-in speechwriter. And we were talking with Jim the other day, Jim Highsmith in our lab, about a tool that lets you take what you've written and translate it to your speech mode. So it will learn how you speak. How many times have you heard, someone that has some great ideas that just, it's not matching the way they present themselves in their speech? Well, suddenly now I've taken my ideas, I get them written in a way that can be communicated with the right tone. And then if I go to speak about it, it will maybe, help me write my speech. Like I've got a personal speechwriter. So why would I not want to do that? I'd be, a fool not to be a better communicator and make sure that I'm coming across the right tone, looking for inclusive wording. That's a mistake that we all make is, hey guys, let's do this, guys. And it can be that check for you, which is just fantastic. So that one for me has been pretty front and center.
Yeah, it's interesting. What I'm starting to realize through some of our research in the lab is there's a lot of, like you say, the landscape of leadership is broad. The landscape of AI is broad, right? It's such a massive landscape. Yet what I'm finding is some of the signals that are coming out. One, you described communication. Is AI a hindrance or a help to communication? I'm on your side of that I think it's an incredible help. And that's one of the key skills of leadership is communication. Another one you think of is decision making. Like can it help us make better decisions, which ties into strategy and priorities and focus and so many other things in leadership. And what I'm realizing is some of the cream is raising from churning this a bit. And what I'm hopeful for, and this kind of leads us to where this is going. We're going to be presenting, in Lisbon in September at World Management Agility Forum, some of the discoveries we're finding through this lab. And Eric, I'm wondering for you, like, where do you see this heading? What are you hoping to maybe explore and experiment with? Maybe it's still questions in your mind that you'd love to have, some insights on, in another 4 to 6 months.
For me, the exciting stuff going forward is like strategic visioning. So one of the things we do now, the way we do it is we gather our leadership team, and we do SWOT analyses, and we look across the spectrum of where we should be doing all that stuff. And it's an activity that comes up, if you're lucky, once every 3 years or so, because it's a big all hands stop and let's gather data and do that analysis. There's no reason, if you have trusted data sources, if you have AI ready data that you can feed, your AI toolkit couldn't be doing strategic visioning all the time and alerting you, again, like we did with the scientific data and weather analysis, alerting you, hey, something's changing here, or this is a trend that's emerging. So strategic visioning going forward probably becomes a continuous process, not a, okay, stop, let's take a snapshot, and as a team try to figure out where we're headed. Well, that's exciting. I mean, it's exciting and terrifying, right? Because on one hand, it's exciting, like, wow, this is going to be coming in all the time. The other hand, it's going to be coming in all the time, and what's your role in interpreting that and reacting to it? But it allows you to be much more dynamic. And in my line of work right now, we're going through a climate crisis, and what we do is monitor the heartbeat of the planet. So it's important that we be as responsive as we can. So we need to understand that. And to me, that's one of the most exciting areas, is really in strategic visioning.
Well, if you think about it, I mean, strategic visioning is a prediction game, right? I mean, if you're taking weather data and predicting future weather, we could take a lot of not only our organizational data, but market data and analyst data, and through all that data, predict where the market's heading, predict where strategies might be more successful, less successful. It seems like a rich place for strategic assistance, like you said.
Well, I think that's really important to understand that. I think as a leader, your role going forward is going to be more picking the trusted data sources you want to feed to your AI toolkit than doing the analysis itself. That once you get these tools and things set up, again, it can see in multiple dimensions. It's going to be fast. It can work through it. Your key role is going to be, okay, what is the data I want to feed to this thing? Whether you're training an LLM and you want to make sure it doesn't end up, inappropriately trained off of, bad language or, sexist biased or anything like that. But if you're looking at the data that powers your business or your government agency or whatever, what are those trusted data sources? How do you know that? Because, it's only as good as the data that it's allowed to look at, train on, and forecast, and then it's really good. So it's going to change that role as a leader to understanding what's my ethical choice here, what's the best data choice, and that's different than today when it's probably like, I'm going to use my brain to try to pick out the trends in this. So the best leaders 5 years from now will be doing just that.
One of my favorite things you had said was, AI is not as much of an Einstein, because it's really just spitting back what it sees. It isn't really creating new per se. The other one, my favorite, I think you said, was AI is like a teenager in the room. Do you mind explaining these two concepts to us?
Yeah. So when you look at what the LLMs are really doing, you're sampling the most likely responses from some kind of bell curve. So, depending on how you set the parameters, if you set it to be, fairly tame, it's just going to give you the middle. That means if you want to write, the greatest new Broadway musical, you're probably not going to be able to do that, or, a best-selling novel, because it's the innovation and the fringe cases. If you let the LLM sample more from the fringe, then suddenly you're getting into that data issue. How was it trained? What are the fringe thoughts and ideas in this thing? So, understanding that that's what it is, quickly getting you to a good chunk of the middle, mostly, unless you throw it out to where it's imagining. And then, suddenly your Earth model's picking up flat earther ideas, and
Oh, geez. Okay.
you probably don't want that in there, right? It's a teenager in that it's a little bit maybe non-empathetic. It can churn stuff out that doesn't go through a human filter and a societal filter. I mean, it's spitting back data, right?
Yeah.
So you may know, based on this situation, like, hey, this is not a good time to tell this employee this because he just got some bad news. It has no filter on that. It's
No
just
filters.
gotcha. So again, what's your role as a leader? How do you know when to be in between it and interpret, and where you do that, and where you're just going to let it go off and go? Because if you sit on everything and just make it, completely under you, it's like raising a teenager. They're never going to get the experience of interacting with the world, and their full potential won't be realized. So how do you make that happen? That's a big question going forward.
Well, I think what that does is it helps me celebrate minds like yours, because I think it's a reminder that as leaders we still have a critical role in this process. And I think our lab and the way I'm looking at this is the future is hybrid, right? There's some interaction in engagement here that is leveraging both, but at least for the foreseeable future, I don't see the human judgment and experience being completely taken away. But Eric, I just want to say, just thanks for sharing your insights. Thanks for being an advisor to our lab. And I look forward to our continued experimentation and sharing in Lisbon.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be a part of it. I really am interested in how this will affect leadership going forward. And I couldn't agree with you more that the humans are going to be involved in this. But what's important to understand is what the humans are doing in that workflow of leadership and the activities of leadership for the best, and those that are going to be successful going forward, is going to change rapidly. So I'm excited to kind of pull out some of those ideas and work with you all to understand, at least for some of the use cases. Again, you said earlier, it's so broad and so overwhelming at times, but even if we can pull it out for some elements, I think it'll be really valuable going forward. So appreciate being part of it.
Awesome. Thank you.